Welcome to Analysis in Chains with Nathan and Neal. It is Monday, the 25th of September, 2017. Welcome, everybody, to Analysis in Chains. We've just passed our 10,000 download mark. Congratulations, Neal.
Congratulations, Nathan.
All right, we are on our road. The next big milestone is 1,000 downloads an episode, so listen in, everyone. We are on the way. You can all say that you listened to us before we were famous.
On the way to where, Nathan?
I don't know. Fame land? We can smoke cigars with Will Smith and on his yacht. Does he have
Why
a yacht?
Will Smith? Like, where did Will Smith come from?
I don't know. I just watched a Will Smith movie last night, and he was the only celebrity I could think of off the top of my head. So we wanted to talk briefly about some interesting news. We had a show about Ripple back a few weeks ago. And in the news today, it looks like there's an interesting lawsuit shaping up between Ripple and R3. Have you heard about this, Neal?
I have, yeah. It's very, very interesting, actually.
So essentially, Ripple and R3 had an agreement back a while ago that when Ripple had raised its $100 million in venture capital and R3, who had raised their $100 million in venture capital, they had a deal where R3 had the right to purchase up to 5 million XRP, or Ripple tokens, at the price of 0.85 cents per unit, which is about $43 million worth of Ripple. Now, what happened is XRP has now climbed up to about 21 cents. It's even crossed the 30-cent barrier a few times, making that amount worth more than $1 billion, potentially as much as $1.5 billion. It's a big amount of money, and Ripple doesn't want R3 to actually honor that because Ripple says a lot of their consortium members have exited the consortium, and so this deal was made under false pretenses. And then R3 has come back and said, well, we have an agreement, we need to be able to buy this. And so it's shaping up to be sort of a clash of the titans with these two enormous startups who have raised immense amounts of money facing off to it, and we'll see what happens. But but R3, if you're unfamiliar with them, is a consortium that is looking for blockchain solutions in the banking space, and Ripple is a specific implementation of a banking algorithm to handle international settlements.
I think it's a very interesting case, the whole banking sector. I think there's a lot of potential to bring blockchain into it, and I think it's the biggest pie, really, for blockchain. And that's the thing about R3 and Ripple, like they have a big opportunity to make huge gains, so naturally they're locking horns because it's not turning out the way they thought it would. And one of the biggest issues with this could be that this could really stunt the development of both companies, and so things may not progress as quickly as they wanted to, and another company could easily march in and take the banking contracts. So we'll see. It's a pity to see this happen, but it's inevitable, I think, when there's such a big pie there to fight over.
What's interesting is that the big players who left the R3 consortium are actually now part of a different group called the CLS group. JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Bank of China, they're all part of this other consortium, which is also in search of a SWIFT alternative in order to increase the efficiency in the international settlements in the banking sphere. But that rings a bell to me. JP Morgan Chase is headed by Jamie Dimon, right? And didn't he appear in the news recently saying, Bitcoin is garbage, and I would fire any of my people who invested in it?
Yeah,
am I wrong in remembering this?
Yeah, but I would see it as two different things. I would see Bitcoin as it does look like a tulip bubble, and I'm not surprised he would shoot it down like that. But with blockchain, like they have, there's so many opportunities for them to gain from blockchain. Of course, they would want to be involved. This is a revolutionary piece of technology. So I see it's two different things, two different discussions, and I'm not surprised why they would want to get involved in blockchain. I know Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan have been at the cutting edge of technology in the financial sector for many years, so it's only natural that they get involved. But it does sound like he is contradicting himself, but I can see why he sees those two separate things.
We're reading up earlier today on AXA. Is it AXA or AXA?
I've only heard of AXA. I've never heard AXA. I've always called it AXA.
Really? Okay.
Well, I come from Ireland, so we often saw AXA insurance advertisements on TV because we used to be able to get British TV channels, so they've always called it AXA.
I've only ever seen it written. So, okay. Well, anyway,
there you
AXA
go.
is offering flight delay insurance using blockchain. So apparently, this is a completely automated system that they're using. So you apply, you buy your insurance, and it's all stored in the blockchain. And then if the flight is delayed, they apparently have a smart contract that will recognize it and then pay you out your insurance. So
That's awesome.
This is the beginning. It begins.
It begins, yeah. Well, I think that's a great application, because if there's one area that there is a lack of trust, is with airlines. Because if my airline cancels a flight or if there's a huge delay, I'm probably more anxious about my current situation. Like, do I have to stay in a hotel? How does it impact, what will happen further down the road? Because it's going to be costing me money if my flight is cancelled. So if you have smart contracts in your whole flight experience through insurance or whatever, I think that will help a lot.
It's also interesting just because it's a simple application, because you only have two parties per insurance claim, right? So it gets more complicated when you get into company insurance or when you get into smart contracts that involve multiple players. But this does seem like a reasonable first step, because you can verify if the flight was delayed. Right, there's no insurance adjuster that has to go in and check an extent of the damage. There's very little gray area. The flight was either delayed or it wasn't. So it's a really good first test run for a smart contract that can be completely automated. And I think going forward, the challenge is always going to be when you have the gray areas, when you have data that isn't automated. But the first places we're going to see these smart contracts come in is always going to be in the black and white decision areas.
Exactly. I totally agree. I'm reading up on Blockchain Revolution, the book by Don Tapscott. And I'm reading about the smart contract world. And it's very, very interesting because, as you say, it works very well in binary situations. Did this event happen, yes or no? But when it becomes a case of quality of work, then that becomes a bit more difficult. So if you have a vendor, you've asked them to do some work, and they do the work, and that in itself is a binary action, but then you assess the work and you're thinking, hey, this is actually rubbish. This is the new difficult part. So you have a lot of companies working on solutions where you maybe have a third party person who can verify if someone complains, hey, this quality work is not good, I'm not prepared to release the funds. You could have a third party who becomes the person who ultimately decides yes or no if the funds should be transferred. And that person will have another private key that can therefore trigger the smart contract.
I mean, now that we're seeing these smart contracts come into the insurance industry, we're going to see more and more decisions being made in an automated way. And when you have these gray areas, that's when the court challenges are going to come in. Some sort of company will put into place a smart contract that has what looks to be a black and white binary decision, like, for example, flight delay insurance. And then there'll come up a gray area that someone didn't think of, where it's not as black and white as you originally thought, and then boom, there'll be a court challenge, and that court challenge will end up setting a precedent for potentially a lot of others. So like I could imagine, even with our simple airline delay, insurance. Some sort of gray area coming in here. Even then, that will test sort of legally what the smart contract, or to what level it should be enforced.
Yeah, I agree.
Speaking of smart contracts, have you heard about what's coming up on Friday?
Oh, dude.
This fall, Analysis in Chains continues to bring you exclusive interviews with some of the hottest stars in the cryptoverse. Join us on Friday, September 29th for an interview with Sergey Nazarov.
Hi, this is Sergey Nazarov. I'm the CEO of smartcontract.com, and this is Analysis in Chains.
We got a lot lined up for you this fall, so be sure to tune in. Until then, keep hashing. I'm quite proud of that promo reel. Alright guys, we're going to end off with a special segment that I recorded a while ago about medical records. Time now for an Analysis in Chains special segment. If you've visited any of the blockchain meetups around your town, someone at some point probably told you that they were working on a blockchain system for medical records. It's one of the hot topics out there. A lot of people are working on it. A lot of the big companies, the big healthcare companies, are working on it now. IBM found that 16% of healthcare executives in a recent poll were planning on doing some sort of blockchain solution by the end of this year. So what I've been trying to wrap my head around is exactly how that would work. Why blockchain? What is the problem that we're solving that blockchain helps with? If you're like me, you think of blockchain and you're thinking of tokens, thinking of Bitcoin and Ether, and creating a token based on a medical record doesn't really help. So maybe that's one of the other aspects of blockchain that's useful. So, you start thinking maybe about the transparency. But not everyone wants their medical records to be transparent. So this is where I was doing some digging. And the main problem that they're trying to solve with blockchain has to do with the immutability of records, making sure that you know not just a snapshot of what a patient's medical history is, what drugs they're taking, or at a certain point in time, but rather what has been the flow. With blockchain, it naturally lends itself to looking at progression over time. A series of snapshots are all stored in one location, and you can use an explorer and go back in time and put together a history saying, well, they were on aspirin, and then they moved to Motrin, and now they're on now they're on morphine, and you would see it progress over time, which is very important when you're dealing with someone's health and making sure that they're not getting prescription conflicts. A second problem that blockchain can address is one of security. Now this, if you're new to blockchain, sort of, learning about how it works, this might seem counterintuitive if you are thinking of blockchain in terms of transparency. Everyone's running a node. Everyone with a node has access to the same data. How can this protect my privacy? How do I know that my employer isn't going to be aware that I have a certain medical condition? This is a solvable problem, and on the one hand you do have public transparency, but on the other hand you have the ability to control access. Blockchain is all about cryptography, and I did some researching on this. If this is a bit out of your technical depth, don't worry, I won't stay on it for long, but I just found it really interesting. Essentially, what you want to do with a medical record is you want to give control to the patients. Because if a patient is going between doctors or between medical facilities, doctors aren't allowed to share information without a patient's permission. There's legal trouble with that. And so by having access given on a blockchain where you can be sure that the person has given access, medical information can be transferred much more quickly. And this is more of a legal issue that this solves rather than a physical issue, but it's an important issue. So how could this work? So if you are sure that a person has a patient is who they say they are, they have their ID, they have keys to their records, the cryptographic keys. What you can do is you can store two databases. One database would be a list of all sorts of medical issues associated with an address or location in the database. So anyone reading through that database would only see that there are various people who have various conditions and take various medications, but they won't know which people are which. They would only see that certain codes, 7842 has cancer, 7879 is taking aspirin, and the codes, it's not one code per person, it's every code is different. So there's not much that you would be able to get from such a database. Then blockchain would do what it does best. It would store records, and it would store in each transaction an encoded location, and the location is a location in that second database, that code. So so from a technical point of view, if a patient gave access to a doctor to look at his medical records or her medical records, the keys, the patient would unlock in the blockchain a list of chronological locations. Those locations would be used to look up in the second database all of the different conditions that the patient had. So anyone looking at this public blockchain would only see encrypted location data that where they couldn't pin it down to a single person, and it was all encrypted anyway and couldn't be unlocked without the key. And anyone looking at the secondary database full of medical history information would not be able to relate any of it to one person because it would just be a big haystack. So this is essentially the approach that we're talking about. Where can this go wrong? Why isn't this widely implemented yet? Well, they're working on it. The main issue with health records is, first of all, the records themselves are incredibly complex. It's much easier to test out a system for blood tests or for prescription drugs or for diagnoses or for lab results than it is to do medical records, which is a conglomeration of all of them, because they have all different players who are producing the records. There's different data and formats, and has to be reconciled. There's legal aspects to doing it, the hurdles to overcome to make sure that the algorithms that are used are foolproof, that someone isn't going to go in and actually be able to determine an individual's medical records. It's one thing to talk about it in theory. It's another thing to do it in practice. And so we're still a ways off from having widespread adoption. However, that doesn't mean we won't see it, and we won't see it quickly. I mean, there are a lot of big players that are working on pilot projects and tests. And given the interest and the number of lives this can save just by making sure that doctors will have access to all of these records, I think we'll be able, with reasonable confidence, to see more and more pilots in the future. That's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to write to us at info@analysisinchains.com if you have any questions or you just want to chat. And don't forget to tune in on Friday for this special exclusive interview with Sergey Nazarov. That's our show. Thanks for tuning in to Analysis in Chains with Nathan and Neal. Check us out at analysisinchains.com, on iTunes, Podbean, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep hashing.